Joel and I would like to call a special person to the microphone. You're probably not surprised who that special person is. We'll give him a little few minutes to get here. David Lewis, please come to the podium.
Oh, my. What am I supposed to do?
You think I can tell you what to do? Do it.
Good morning, everybody. Once again, I'm addressing an empty room. I can't see anybody. I feel a little bit like a funeral director that I'm here to read the last rites on this particular conference, and I hate to do that because I've loved every minute of it. It's just been a terrific time and wonderful, wonderful things. I think we all agree that absolutely wonderful things have come out of it. But I was sitting reflecting about regrettably, I probably will not be around for the next conference in 25 years. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking how much my old friend Jules Gregory would have loved to have been here. Jules was the founder of the idea of Rudats. When I first came to America and I applied for membership in the AIA, I was rejected because urban design was not architecture. And that was my first fight. In the course of that, I heard that, rather incredibly, that there was going to be a talk in Washington, D.C. by the then president of the AIA, who was a man called Archibald Rogers, who was the head of a very prestigious architectural firm called RTKL. And at that presentation, I drove all the way to Washington to hear it, and at that presentation, he demonstrated how the city as we know it would cease to exist, and how we would build highways out to new suburban areas which would become the nuclei for new towns, and around shopping centres, but then an innovation. Now, of course, an aberration. So at the end of it, the place was crowded, and being somewhat shy, I sat at the back, and a tousle-haired elderly man got up at the front, rumpled and overweight, and tousle-haired, and he got up and he pointed his finger at the president of the AIA and used a word that I'd never at that time heard used in public. He pointed his finger and said, "Arch, what the fuck are you going to do with the elderly and the Negroes?" And there was silence. Nobody knew what to say. At lunchtime, I went to look for this Mr. Gregory, and I couldn't find him. And then I thought, wait a minute, he'll probably be drinking his lunch. So I went into the bar, and there he was. And I tapped him on the shoulder, and I asked him whether he was the architect of a little house that I'd seen reproduced in a magazine called Architecture d'Aujourd'hui, for which for a short while I'd been the English correspondent. And It had a sort of roof like this that was sort of, could have been designed by Felix Mandela, you know, and so I said, Mr. Gregory, did you design a little house that had a roof like a reclining Marilyn Monroe? And he said, what do you know about that? And I said, well, I saw it in Architecture d'Aujourd'hui. He said, nobody here reads Architecture d'Aujourd'hui. So we talked for a little moment or two, and then he disappeared. I thought he'd gone to the bathroom, but he came back, and he said, I've just been talking to Nancy, and you're to come next weekend and spend the weekend with us. And so I drove from Pittsburgh to Lambertville, where he lived outside Princeton, and for the first time I heard about Rudettes. He'd only just begun the concept of Rudettes. And there was a little group around us, and Alan Malick. Alan, you were one of the early people, and I salute you. It's just wonderful. And from that early nucleus came the idea of absolutely direct intervention. Direct intervention. And let the process flow. Well, I don't need to tell you all about that, because this is now, and as we've demonstrated at this conference, this is now absolutely the right way to go. We know about it, and we've seen it, and we've seen it in action, and so forth. But it gives me, and I just want to remind everybody that of the spirit of Jules Gregory, because at the next conference, Jules will be joined by various other spirits. They'll be floating around. My next point, which I want to make, is that sitting right beside me here on this podium are Don Carter and Joel Mills, and I want to first of all thank them enormously for everything, just enormously. They have been terrific. And I would also, in absentia, like to thank Hack Didper too, from the Prince of Wales Foundation. And my reason for doing this is to say that we now have the backing of potentially 3 great forces to constellate around as we move forward into the next 25 years. It was the Prince of Wales himself who tugged my sleeve at that first meeting in Washington and said, let's continue this dialogue. And I was sitting at the time that he did that between Prince Charles and his secretary, Sir John Riddle. And so I turned to Sir John and I said that I would be in London a short time later, and I can't quite remember how long, a matter of weeks, could we meet, and we did. And out of those conversations with Sir John, and I want to pay a particular tribute to Sir John, because Sir John Riddle really backed the idea of the first Remaking Cities conference that we had here in Pittsburgh, and he helped me very much, and all of those who worked with me to get that going. So another spirit who should be with us is Sir John Riddle. As we go through, yes, let me just end up by saying here that we should do everything we can to strengthen the Remaking Cities Institute, which has come into being as a result of the first conference. The Remaking Cities Institute that is now headed up by Don Carter And we need to do everything we can to strengthen it, to ask it to do research programs for us and other programs that we can do. And we need to strengthen the relationship between the Remaking Cities Institute and the Prince of Wales Foundation, because the Prince of Wales Foundation also came out of the first conference. And this is very, very important indeed that we strengthen those two groups. Just let me end up by a word of warning, and then because I do perceive it as a word of warning. Oh, before I get to that, I was very moved this morning by the suggestion that we should have a delegation at the next conference, or some inclusion at the next conference, of people who live in the segregated slums, not just in this country, but around the world. We need to get, and it was mentioned, the shanty towns that exist in my country, South Africa. And as you know, at the time of the Sharpeville massacre, the first massacre of the rising of people coming out of the shanty towns, when that happened, I took my South African passport to South Africa House on Trafalgar Square in London and asked to see the ambassador, of course I was refused. And so I tore up my South African passport and asked the secretary please to give the shards of my passport to the ambassador. So I feel very deeply about this problem. Judy, my wife, and I went back to South Africa after Mandela became the president of South Africa, which itself was an incredible event. I mean, that was extraordinary. And we found that my old city, Cape Town, is of course surrounded by shanties of the most appalling poverty. People living in corrugated iron boxes and even less substantial materials, children without education, whole communities without sanitation. I mean, let's make sure that we begin to enfranchise these people at our next conference. And finally, my word of warning, which I rather shiver to give, but I will get to give it, and that is that we should be very aware that we are breeding inevitably and wonderfully a new generation of urban design intelligentsia. Everybody in this room is a custodian of the new generation of urban designers that are coming up out of our schools. And I want to warn you to beware, to keep the lines of communication with the people, with the people of our cities, to keep those lines of communication wide open. Do not, or shall I say, beware of breeding a new generation of intelligentsia who will manipulate the processes in order to produce the a priori answers that they go in with. We have to keep the dialogue wide open. We have to train our people to understand that they are the vehicles of democracy. They are the vehicles for keeping the lines open and not steering the process towards the solutions that they themselves champion. So with that in mind, I would really like to thank you all for coming. I feel very humble and at all of this, as you might imagine. I feel myself tremendously privileged to have been in the middle of the process from that beginning, just almost 50. I was counting it up, 48 years ago since I met with Jules. And I just want to thank you all very, very much and tell you how humbled I am by the tremendous success. And I want to congratulate my wonderful friend Don Carter and Joel Mills, and Joel particularly because he is in the heart of that AIA, which is still, well, all right.
Enough said, David.
Thank you.
He'll help you down the stairs. A true force of nature, wouldn't you say? David, thank you so much. David opened the first conference, and he's helping us close this Congress. Joel and I wanted to share some thoughts we have about next steps. A lot of people say, well, now what's going to happen? And we even heard that from our panelists today. Well, there's some immediate things that are going to happen. The results of the proposition voting are going to go up on the website. The presentations are going to go on the website. Prince Charles is already on YouTube, so you can watch him if you want again or send it around. It's going viral, and people are twittering about Prince Charles, including Richard Florida, I think, is twittering about it. So that's immediate. We're going to invite feedback from all of the delegates. You'll be getting more emails from Olivia and me and Joel. So we want some feedback. We've gotten some already. We had some nice feedback this afternoon. Our in-house publications from all of our professional societies will be doing follow-up stories on this. That includes the AIA, the RIBA, the APA, the ULI, CNU, and others. So we expect that'll be happening. There have been media coverage, so you'll see some stories coming out around it. I've alluded a couple times to this in person and also in emails that we will be publishing a book. We'll be starting writing that next year. All 10 case studies, presenters have agreed to write 5,000 to 6,000 word chapters in that book. We'll use some of the thought leader papers in the book. We'll do the proceedings of the book. And we're going to invite Prince Charles to write the foreword to that book. I have 2 or 3 publishers who are already interested in it. They're academic publishers. And they see it as a very important book that would be a textbook in urban studies courses and urban design courses and in a number of other ways. So we're going to make that happen. And I have a couple foundations who want to support that financially. I've said to most of our presenters, especially across the Atlantic, that I'll be doing a tour next year to meet with them and to conclude the things around what they're doing. And I expect that I'll be doing some speaking over there related to that. Another important thing is we're not conclusive about this, and we didn't vote on this deliberately. Should we have another convening? If so, when? 1 year, 3 years, 4 years, in Manchester or Turin or in Detroit? I'm going to enlist the program committee again in dialogue around that. They've been invaluable in making all of this happen. They're very intelligent and experienced people. You've heard almost all of them in one form or another in this conference, in this Congress. So we're going to ask them to debrief us on the Congress from where their viewpoint is. What do they think the follow-up should be? And should we reconvene? And I'm going to turn this over to Joel now. He has a few final thoughts. But I just remind everybody the tours are still ongoing. So the afternoon tours will leave at 2, so get there a little early. Saturday tours leave at 6. And I feel like I've made 340 more friends, or maybe some of you are already my friends, but this has been a delightful week for me, a real highlight of my profession. So thank you.
Don, excuse me. Don's touched on sort of product issues moving forward, and there will be a lot to come. But I wanted to offer a few reflections about kind of what worked and what didn't. I was taken to task yesterday by Charles in a great way, Charles Campion in a great way, about not having a root at this time, and then Don brought that forward this morning in his challenge, and David, in a very related way in his final comments. And I mentioned that specifically in the plenary this morning, knowing that it's not here this time, because I think if there is another event, that's something that needs to come back. There were reasons behind that in terms of finding a project that would work and fit within what we were trying to do and all that. But I think that we probably would have added a lot to the event to have that, and we certainly should bring it back in the future. The other thing is, in our planning for the event, this whole thing we did with zero capacity or resources, zero. We got together coincidentally about this, and this is not a part of anybody's regular program. And Don said, well, next year's the 25th anniversary, and I had in my head doing something very minimal in D.C. About design assistance, and he said, oh, or we could do this really big thing, and we don't have any money, and we don't have any staff capacity or anything like that. So yeah, let's do it, and the point underneath that is we did not do it. We only have so much time. Most of our conversations this year, I was in an airport somewhere, because we're out doing RUDATs and SDATs around the country. We just stretched as much as we could, but so many of you made this event possible, made contributions to it. And I'm thinking, in foremost in my mind, the German Marshall Fund, through which almost all of our European delegates were here through their efforts and through their relationships, and it made such a difference to our conversation. But I really think that if we had had them involved in the planning committee in a bigger way, it would have impacted our conversation in the event in a substantial way too. And so these are all things to think about moving forward. But I didn't want to end the event when we were talking about the soul of the city this morning without an altar call. Because all of you contributed to this, and at the end of the day, that product, and we'll have the propositions, and there's all that substance that was beneath the propositions that we need to capture in some way. But you are all the messengers, the initial coalition, all those foundations that supported the event, not only gave financially but sent representatives. Everybody was committed fully to producing something that can move the discussion forward, and I think everyone is equally committed as a result of the event. So I just want to thank you all for your contributions to that moving forward. Obviously, we'll have a lot of post-event conversations about both what's going to happen in the near term in terms of the next steps. Don's mentioned some of it. Part of it is going to be telling the story of this event. Our film crew, through your generosity, interviewed a ton of you this week and covered the proceedings. The hotel is going to have video footage of all the plenary and main sessions. So there's a lot to work with to tell that story. But we want to build this coalition and grow the conversation and build the relationships so that if and when the next event takes place, it takes place with even more energy than this one did. And finally, I'll thank my colleague up here. This guy, his wife is here this week, and I said, thank you, because I know you haven't seen him for the last year. because it was in his city and he had to carry 80% of it, and through the help of Olivia Wells, they really put it together. So